Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello! Welcome to the Science Fiction Bookstore Skype interviews. I'm going to start up with some light questioning.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yes. I've heard a rumor that you're a role player.
Absolutely, yes. That's I don't get much time to do it these days, but that's back in the 1980s when role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons were first available in the UK. I played that. RuneQuest is another one. My two favourites: Call of Cthulhu, the role-playing game, and Traveller, the science fiction one. And I was a huge fan of Traveller, and I think I used to referee, so I think all the gaming that I did then, inventing stories on the spot, stood me in very good stead for making stories up now.
Most of us we talk to have been role players. So you don't play anything now?
I still got rule books and stuff and the desire to do it. I just don't have the time. The man hours to play effectively. It's the same reason I don't play very much Warhammer, even though I write Warhammer a lot. Is that it's an opportunity to I'd never get any work done. Really, I get so lost in gaming that I'd never get the work done in the first place. So I tend not to. Although I do sort of look at rule books and stuff. I recently got one of the reissued Traveller rule books just for the sheer fun of looking back at stuff that I'd been using sort of too many years ago.
Cthulhu's coming out with the 30-year anniversary edition, leather-bound, really pretty one.
Absolutely.
So maybe that's something that needs to go into the bookshelf.
I think he probably does, actually. I think he probably does, yeah.
You're also a huge comic fan, I gather.
Absolutely. Well, I spend a good, I guess, 45 to 50% of my time writing comics for DC and Marvel and 2000 AD and places like that. So that's born out of a great love of comics. And I was a comic writer before I was a novelist. I read comics when I was a kid, and my favourite things were drawing and writing stories. And when I first discovered comics, I realised that I could actually do those things at the same time. My two favourite hobbies, I could do them at the same time. So I used to draw my own comics and write the stories, and that was my favourite pastime as a kid before I discovered role-playing games. So years later, when I was sort of looking for a job, I got a job at Marvel Comics in London, and an editorial job there, and that's when I started writing. And I started writing freelance comic strips like Care Bears and Ghostbusters and G.I. Joe and Transformers and that kind of stuff, which is the stuff they were publishing. And that really was the start of my writing career. And I'd been writing comics. I wanted to write novels, but I had a fairly busy ongoing career writing comics for the best part of 10 years when the Black Library Warhammer first asked me to write a novel for them. And since then, really in the last 15 years, I literally spend my mornings writing novels and my afternoons writing comics. I move between the two to keep my mind fresh, and I love doing it. And I'm so yes, huge enthusiasm for comics. You can't see obviously because of the angle of this camera, but I've got comic book pages of artwork on my wall. I've got box files full of comics, and see if I can grab something at random. Yes, just I went to the comic shop the other day, so I've got comics all over the place. Everywhere you look. So yeah.
So you talked about before Black Library contacted you. How did you get contacted by Games Workshop and 40K? What was it that made them choose you?
It was Conan.
You choose them.
It was, funnily enough, it was Conan to begin with. I was, as I say, a fairly established comic book writer, and I had and Black Library, who at the time I was living quite close to their headquarters. Now I had never played Warhammer or Warhammer 40,000. But I knew what they were because as a role player in the 80s, when Games Workshop was starting out, I was familiar with their products and their style, the Citadel miniature style and their artwork and that kind of stuff. So although I sort of stopped playing regularly when Warhammer came out, I was certainly aware of it. I knew what a Space Marine was and that kind of stuff. So I had that sort of connection to it. And they were looking for established writers, particularly with a comics background, who could start doing comics for them. And they saw some issues of Conan that I'd written for Marvel in the States, and thought, oh, he might be good. So they invited me in, and we almost immediately established that I had sort of got I got the flavour of it right. I understood what it was that they wanted, and I started writing first of all comics. And after written comics for a while, they said, "Will you write short stories?" And I said, "Yes, I'm happy to write short stories." And then they said, "Well, how about novels?" And that's where the novels started. So I'd already had this great ambition to write and publish novels, and here was somebody saying, "We'll commission you to write novels," and that was 39 and a half novels ago. I'm halfway through my 40th novel, so.
Oh, that will be exciting. The Horus Heresy series 30K era has been hugely successful, at least here.
Yeah, no, it's huge.
Do you know how many books that are going to be published for this line?
We don't.
A well-kept secret.
It's such a well-kept secret that none of us know. When we sat down, they sort of handpicked the writers who were going to take on this project when it started, which is just 5 years ago now. I've just seen the 5th anniversary edition of Horus Rising, which amazes me that it's 5 years ago I wrote that. And we talked about different ways that we would approach it, whether we would, try and do it in 12 books or 20 books or whatever. And we eventually decided that the Horus Heresy was potentially such a huge quasi-historical event, this huge myth, but the best way of approaching it was as if we were approaching something like the Napoleonic Wars or World War II, is that we would try and tell stories chronologically, so that we eventually told the whole thing, and we would try to tell stories that deserve to be told, so that everybody got, every legion, every main character got some sort of screen time, as it were. But we also weren't going to cap it. If somebody came along and said, "I've got a great idea for a book that's happening over here whilst your main story's happening over there," that we would include it. So it's a backdrop, and we've now got a very determined onward progression in terms of where the story goes. But we don't want to rush it, really. We don't want to linger and dawdle and make people go, "Oh, it's getting boring." But by the same token, we don't want to go say, "Oh, it's going to be 30 books," and then get to the end and go, "Oh, there's so many other things we could have done." So that was the choice we made, and I think it's worth doing it that way.
Okay, I think so too. It sounds very, very promising. Will you and Mike Lee ever write more about Darkblade?
Yes, indeed. Yeah,
yes, indeed.
That's absolutely something that's underway even now. I don't know exactly when the next one will appear, but that's a process that we want to do more of. The first series was very, very successful, so very, very happy to do that. And I don't get to do as much Warhammer as I'm a much more Warhammer 40,000, and it's really nice to do Warhammer as a change of pace.
You've done, you do a horrendous amount of writing. You're one of the most efficient writer out there. And quite recently you changed forums and did the Ultramarine movie. How did that experience differ?
In terms of the actual writing, sort of not a great deal, because writing a screenplay is actually fairly close to writing a comic in terms of the visual storytelling that you've got to employ. But there was an awful lot you learned about the way a movie works and how the things you can do and the things that you can't do and the things that you should remember to try and do. They're not always intuitive in the same way, or certainly they don't necessarily work to the same rules as a book or a comic. And sometimes it's a really unlikely thing. You discover that you've asked for something that you thought was really simple and is very difficult or expensive, or you ask to do something that's expensive and difficult, so you don't do very much of it, and they say, "No, you could have done a lot of that because it's actually very easy to do something." So there's all sorts of things you learn as you go along. It was I really enjoyed doing it. It was wonderful actually being there. Strong character driven, doesn't rely on gigantic special effects. So I think it'd be a good thing to do. Which is fascinating. I think I learned not only about how to write a film, but also how to write. I think it was an extremely good thing to do. Yes, I am. I think the only thing I can't say about that is exactly what it's going to be, because I have a very good close relationship with Mark Gascoigne, who is the angriest of all angry robots. He's the head honcho, and there are loads of things he'd like me to do, and there are loads of things I'd like to do for him, and it's a matter of deciding what the best one to do next. And it may well be that it's a sequel to, or a successor to one of the 2 books I've written for him already. So a sequel to Triumph, or another book in the set in the embedded universe. It wouldn't be strictly a sequel, but it would be one that used that background and that setting. I also, however, have a really interesting idea that is completely new, and I think he's quite keen on that as well. So it's really a matter of having some more meetings with him whilst he decides exactly which one of those he wants to go for. But yeah, very keen, very looking forward to doing that.
And it also is in some respects, it's a very basic one. It's a very basic story because.
Well, I'm being kept very busy in terms of. Okay, in terms of comics at the moment, I'm writing New Mutants for Marvel, which is one of the X-Men books. Heroes for Hire, which is a street level vigilante book for them, and a book called the Annihilators, which is cosmic level superheroes. It's like the Cosmic Avengers. So they're very exciting, very busy projects. Over at DC, I'm working on Wonder Woman and Lois Lane for their Flashpoint event, and then when their big September launch things happens, Andy and I are doing a book called Resurrection Man, which is taking back a character that we created for them about back in the 90s, and doing a new version of that. So that keeps us very busy. And there are some other ones there. And like I said, I always work for 2000 AD in this country, writing things like Sinister Dexter. So there's a steady flow of weekly comics there. On the novel front, I have just finished the 13th Gaunt's Ghost novel, which is called Salvation's Reach. And in fact, if you hang on,
I think the only thing I can't say about that is exactly what it's.
they sent me my first copy of it yesterday, so that's actually, it's not out yet, but that's the 13th Gaunt book in hardback form, Salvation's Reach, lovely cover there. So that's very exciting. It's the only one of those I've got. So that will be out in September, and I'm very pleased with that. And in about a month's time, I start work on my next Horus Heresy novel, which is called No Fear, and it's the story of the Battle of Calth. So it's Ultramarines versus World Bearers. So that's, if you know your Warhammer, that's a fairly big deal. It's one of the big events of the Horus Heresy, and I'm really looking forward to that. And then after that, thank you. After that, I write finally get my teeth into a sequel to the Eisenhorn and Ravenor Inquisitor books that I've written for them, and it'll be a third and final trilogy. And we're jokingly calling it Eisenhorn versus Ravenor because it takes the characters from both series and puts them into one. But that is it's been a long time since I've written those characters, and I'm very much looking forward to it. And right now, literally right now, I mean, before I came onto Skype to talk to you, I was writing the next chapter of my current job, which I'm now racing to conclusion. Is the BBC has asked me to write a Doctor Who novel for release at Christmas. So I'm writing a book that will come out last year. Michael Moorcock wrote a big hardback special novel for the Christmas release, and I'm writing this year's. And this year, and my book's called The Silent Stars Go By, which is a line from A Christmas Carol, and it's about the current Doctor, Matt Smith's Doctor, along with Amy and Rory. So it's the cast from the television, and I get to introduce them to the Ice Warriors, which are one of Doctor Who's classic all-time villains. They're almost up there with the Cybermen and the Daleks as being very big. In fact, from the prop time again, there's an Ice Warrior. So that's keeping me very busy at the moment because it's on obviously because it's a Christmas book, it's on a tight deadline, and I'm very determined to do a good job of it. So that's what I meant when I was saying to you earlier about the deadline following deadline. It was Warhammer, Doctor Who, Horus Heresy, Inquisitor. So I'm quite busy.
In September, I'm very pleased with that. And in about a month's time, I start work on my next Horus Heresy novel.
Wow.
She's called No Fear, and it's the story of the Battle of Calth. So it's Ultramarines versus World Bearers. So that's.
Oh yes.
If you know your Warhammer,
I could, yes.
That's a fairly big deal.
It wasn't lovely at the time, I have to say. This was a few years ago when I'd written 4 or 5 novels, and I was working on the. Oh look, we're being visited by my cat now. Can you see my cat? There we go. He's obviously wants to make his presence felt in Sweden. So there you go. Thank you for that. Yes, I was working on. Yes, there's a tail. There's an extraneous tail. I was working on the 4th Gaunt's Ghost book. He's back. Look at the screen. Look up there. Oh, don't.
Now,
Come on.
right now,
Stop it.
Before I came on to Skype to talk to you, I was writing...
Yes, I was working on a Gaunt's Ghost book. It was the fourth one. It was called Honour Guard, which is something of a notorious book. It's the sort of the beginning of where stories got really, really complicated. But anyway, I was working it to deadline, and it was going terribly well. I had it all planned out, and I got most of it done, and my computer died on me. It died completely and frazzled the hard drive. And it was. Well, I was saying I'm not very technically minded, but I hadn't really learned to properly back up at that point. So I had no additional copy. I simply lost the whole manuscript. All I had of it was essentially the notes that I was working from and my memory of what the book was like. And I rang Mark up and I said, I've had this disastrous thing. I had a month of deadline left. They'd given me sort of 3 or 4 months to write it and I had a month of the deadline left. And I said, what do we do? Do we move the deadline? Or do you want me to see if I can try and rewrite it from memory in the month that remains to us? And because it was early on in the history of the Black Library and they didn't have, they were still a very small publisher, and I didn't want to sort of aggravate their printers, and they had expensive print deadlines. He said, well, look, can you see if you can rewrite it in the time we've got left?
So I did. I
rewrote a 100,000 word novel. In a month. It's the quickest I've ever written anything like that. I wrote a novel in a month. It was an incredibly intense experience because I knew it had to be done, so I just sort of engaged with it and sort of worked, slept, and then did that every day. It was just work and sleep until I finished this thing. But the very, very strange thing is that it was better than the one I'd lost when I finished. You'd think that if you were writing something that fast, that it would be a bit sloppier and you wouldn't have got such a great end result. But in fact, I think it's because I'd almost rehearsed it the first time in the book that I'd lost. I produced a tighter book that had better structure and better plot links and whole characters that weren't there in the original version. There were several characters who I was writing so fast I sort of hadn't got time to argue with them, and there were characters who were turning up and saying this scene would be better if I was in it, so I was letting them be in it, as it were. And one of those was a character called Lite who came out of nowhere and inserted himself into the second version of the book and then became an incredibly important character for the next few books. In fact, determined the course of the storyline and some of the most important things that have happened. And it came out of nowhere. It wasn't anything planned. It was just something that happened in this sort of intensity of trying to recover the book. But I hope that never happens to me again, because it was, I had to lay down for quite a long time at the end of it.
I had this disastrous thing. I had a month of deadline left. They were giving me sort of 3 or 4 months to write it, and I had a month of the deadline.
Okay, fantastic.
And I said, what do we do? Do we move the deadline, or do you want me to see if I can try and rewrite it from memory in the month that remains to us? And because it was early on in the history of the they were still a very small publisher, and I didn't want to sort of aggravate their printers, and they had expensive print deadlines. He said, well, look, can you see if you can rewrite it in the time we've got left?
Yep.
So I did. I rewrote 100,000 words.
Fan fiction. I think fan fiction is. I think fan fiction is vital. Most people. You say that a lot. When you talked about role-playing gaming earlier on, you said how many science fiction authors come from have role-playing ghosts in their past. And I think an awful lot of the people who are writing most effectively and fluently in the genre have played role-playing games, have written fan fiction. It is that enthusiasm that makes you do it, whether you're being paid for it or not, that gets you, propels you along into wanting to write, and sort of helps you build up your muscles that you're going to need if you actually end up doing it professionally. I think the crucial thing is to understand where either a piece of work stops being fan fiction and becomes something professional, and when you as a writer stop writing something for the sheer fun of it and actually want to pursue it. It's a difficult line to navigate, but I think fan fiction, particularly in this age of the internet, when you can write a piece of fan fiction and get a great big audience for it, is the most extraordinarily creative thing to do, both from your point of view, and also an opportunity to get proper feedback on your work from unbiased individuals, even if some of that is hateful and horrible, because we all know what message boards are like. But the point is, if you're going to write professionally, you need readers. There's no point saying I'm going to be a writer unless there are readers at the other end of that equation. So in order to get readers, you need to write something that readers want to read. So the opportunity of writing something, putting it on the internet, and finding out what people liked about it and what people didn't like about it, so you can improve upon it next time, I think is really useful. It's like they're giving you a free gift. They're sort of test driving your stories for you. So I'm a wholehearted approver of fan fiction, even in its craziest extremes.
Just ask you two fun questions which we usually ask our authors. One is, what's your view on fan fiction?
Oh, goodness me, that's a good question. I don't know. I have got somebody did give me a t-shirt which I wear to conventions sometimes that just says across the middle, "This is my clone," which seems quite appropriate because people assume that I must be cloned in order to have written as much as I do. And I also wanted, if you're familiar with this is quite an obscure, silly joke, but it's something that I seriously want a t-shirt with it. One of the Primarchs in Warhammer 40,000 is called Ferrus Manus, and he is killed at the Battle of Isfahan. He's one of the first great casualties in the Horus Heresy story. And if you're familiar with the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Matthew Broderick's character has this campaign where you actually see it on things like the water cooling tower, which just says "Save Ferris" all the way through. And I would like a t-shirt that says "Save Ferris" with a U, referring to Ferrus Manus rather than Ferris, but in that block capital writing that they have in the film. And I think I'd probably be the only person who laughed at it, but it would make me laugh a lot.
You can write a piece of fan fiction and get a great big audience for it is the most extraordinarily
well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me. I hope I've answered your questions well enough, and I would really love to come and visit you all in person. So as soon as we can do that.
Even if some of that is
fantastic.
Horrible, because we all know what message boards are like. But the point is, if you're going to write.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll talk to you again. Bye bye.
Unless there are readers at the other end of that equation. So in order to get readers, you need to write something that readers want to read. So the opportunity of writing something, putting it on the internet, and finding out what people liked about it and what people didn't like about it, so you can improve upon it next time, I think is really useful. It's like they're giving you a free gift. They're sort of test driving your stories for you. So I'm a wholehearted approver of fan fiction, even in its craziest extremes.
The second one is, if you could have anything written or printed on a t-shirt, what would you make it?
Oh, goodness me, that's a good question. I don't know. I have got somebody did give me a t-shirt which I wear to conventions sometimes that just says across the middle, "This is my clone," which seems quite appropriate because people assume that I must be cloned in order to have written as much as I do. And I also wanted, if you're familiar with this is quite an obscure, silly joke, but it's something that I seriously want a t-shirt with it. One of the Primarchs in Warhammer 40,000 is called Ferrus Manus, and he is killed at the Battle of Isfahan. He's one of the first great casualties in the Horus Heresy story. And if you're familiar with the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Matthew Broderick's character has this campaign where you actually see it on things like the water cooling tower, which just says "Save Ferris" all the way through. And I would like a t-shirt that says "Save Ferris" with a U, referring to Ferrus Manus rather than Ferris, but in that block capital writing that they have in the film. And I think I'd probably be the only person who laughed at it, but it would make me laugh a lot.
Then we say thank you very much for giving us your time, and hope to see you here soon.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me. I hope I've answered your questions well enough, and I would really love to come and visit you all in person. So
that would be lovely. Thank you very much, and good luck with your Christmas special.
Thank you very much indeed.
Bye. Yes, you will. Bye.